Hello. You are listening to the Carroll Connection with your host, Jared Carroll.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Carroll Connection. I'm your host, Jared Carroll, here to bring you guys another great episode. Did want to take a chance to shout out my last week's episode 126, the 2022 year in review episode featuring Kate Abrams, her first time back on the podcast since episode 46 and 4. We talked about pretty much everything that she's been up to with her business, Monet, into hair, skin, all that type of stuff, skincare, hair care. Excuse me, guys. We talked about her journey getting out of Seekonk, and that has been a huge goal for her, is to move out of Seekonk, getting on TikTok, becoming more prevalent on TikTok. And I told her to get on TikTok, so it's nice that we had that conversation. But you guys could check that episode out at thecarrollconnection.simplecast.com. Also available Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all the major listening platforms. If you like to watch your podcast, you could check it out on YouTube. Search The Carroll Connection or Jared M. Carroll. It should pop up right for you. And if you want to be a guest or return as a guest, you can hit me up on Instagram at Jared M. Carroll or at The Carroll Connection. If you have my number, you could text me or Snapchat, however you want to communicate with me, and we'll set that up in advance. So bringing me to today's episode 127 with Laurel Mulherin.
Yes. Yeah, thank you for having me.
Pleasure to have you on, and just obviously shout out Claudia for helping me set this up. It's been one of my hands down biggest supporters, love her to death. Like, there's been only a few people that have ever been on the podcast that like share my stuff consistently and like actually support the message, and like I just always like, I know she'll listen to this, so I really appreciate that.
She's great, but I'm biased.
Maybe a little bit.
Maybe just a little bit.
But for yourself, just tell everyone who you are and what you're doing currently.
So my name is Laurel. I am a personal trainer and photographer. I grew up in a very tiny town in Maine, about 5 hours north of here, and have been in Rhode Island for about like 15 years now.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
We're going to have a ton to talk about. I know I had to cut you off right before earlier because we were talking about something great that I want you guys to hear as well. So, how I like to, like I said, off the podcast, how I like to start the podcast is with family dynamic and kind of like your upbringing.
Sure.
And I always like to explain for new listeners why I do that. And it's to kind of, we're laying down the foundation of your life here. So I like to kind of dive into this early stuff, and then we kind of build upon that. And this episode is about you and your life. So I think it's always important to talk about these things because who we are as people does stem from our childhood and upbringing. So
definitely,
I always find it super interesting to hear about how different people are raised. So whatever you're comfortable with sharing, I'll let you kind of take the floor with that.
Yeah. So I grew up in a very small town, like I said, called Chesterville, Maine. It's about 5 hours north of Providence. We are so small that we don't have our own zip code because we don't have a post office. And so we share a zip code with the town next to us. And so we kind of don't exist. We do, but we don't. We are also the birthplace of earmuffs.
Okay.
And so we have an earmuff parade every year.
No way.
They put a big pair of earmuffs on a school bus, on a fire truck, and anybody can be in the parade. You just have to wear earmuffs.
That's actually fucking hilarious. That's crazy. You don't have a zip code, but you have an earmuff parade.
We have an earmuff parade. Thank you, Chester Greenwood. He made earmuffs. He also kind of invented the first spark plug. But yeah, and so so growing up in like a pretty tiny town, like my high school, I'll tell people, they'll be like, oh, how many people did you go to high school with? And I was like, oh, well, there were 1,000 of us, but it was a regional high school that was like 12 different towns, all coming together in one high school.
That's not too bad then. It kind of helps.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the college that I went to was pretty small too, but I mean, it was good because then at least you have a class of like 200 kids, 250 kids, Yeah,
I was thinking, you said small town, I'm like, man, it's probably gonna be like 100 people in or something. Yeah. Like, no, that was more similar to like my high school actually.
Yes.
I think we had like almost 200 in Seekonk at the time, and it was like a bigger class. So like it wasn't like obviously we're in Seekonk, I'm in Seekonk, and then the town over is like a regional, not regional, but it's like Dayton and Rehoboth, so it's a little bit bigger. So like we do have schools similar to kind of like what you're talking about too, locally too. And we played sports against like the regional schools, and I
Yeah.
always hated that because they always had so many people, and like
Yeah.
compared to like a smaller school, so like that was probably a pretty interesting experience. What about with like your family, whatever you're comfortable with sharing?
Sure. I'm an open book, so you can also ask me anything you want to.
Okay.
So it was really just like my mom, my dad, me, and my brother. My dad was originally from Maine. My dad, though, was also like 16, almost 17 years older than my mom. And so, like a lot of his family was just like much older, and lived like in more northern parts of Maine. And then my mom's family, she's from New York. And so they were all, 8 hours south of us. But very oddly enough, both my cousin and I both ended up in Providence, which is kind of funny for like spending our whole lives apart. And now we both ended up in the same spot. But yeah, so it was really just the four of us. Growing up, we didn't have like a super big like extended family. We go to New York like maybe once or twice a year to go and visit my mom's family. And then, like I said, like my dad's family was all much older. And then, so my dad was married before my mom. And so that was, so my dad didn't even graduate from high school. He probably made it through like 6th or 7th grade, signed up for the Air Force, was stationed in Texas, met a woman there. They had 5 kids. And then my dad went to Korea and was in the Korean War. When he came back, his marriage had ended, and his then ex-wife had taken the 5 kids and moved. She moved back to Mexico because she was Mexican. And then they moved to like Southern California later. And so I grew up with 5 half siblings who, kind of came in and out at various points, various stages of my life. But, wasn't really like kind of close to them. And so it was really just kind of the 4 of us in the middle of nowhere. My dad, for a while, like probably ages like 1, 2, 3, 4, because my brother's 2 years older than I am. He worked about 2 hours north of us, near, you said you like to hike, near Katahdin. And he would be there like Monday through Friday, come home Friday night, stay with us, and then go back on Sundays. And then during the summers, we would live in a tent in Baxter State Park, just so that we could all kind of live together as a family, which was a very interesting way until you start going to school, to just kind of like spend your summers, where it's just like, okay, now go live in a tent for a summer.
Did you enjoy that experience?
Oh, yeah.
It sounds like it. Like,
no, I mean, you don't know different when you're a kid, when you're like 4 or 5, it's just like you're with your family and you're happy and, you have fun. And, it was nice because like my dad was there more, rather than just being there on the weekends.
That's good though. And like, I always find it super interesting. Are they still together?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so my dad passed away 3 years ago.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
He had Alzheimer's. And so
that's a tough thing to deal with. Yeah.
It was very tough. But it was such a blessing that he passed before COVID, because I can't imagine having had to go through everything that we went through with him and COVID at the same time. Like that would have been like, so what seems to be, just this horrible, heartbreaking thing, which it was like the biggest gift that we could have ever gotten, because we were able to be with him, and
in hindsight,
of him and hindsight.
Yeah. It's because like that period was for COVID. My heart goes out to a lot of those families that lost members of their family or friends and stuff like that, because like you really couldn't be with your family. No. So luckily, well, I don't know if it's luckily, but like my grandfather passed away during COVID, and he was my second episode.
Okay.
And it's hands down my favorite episode of all time.
Yeah.
I even got his signature tattooed on me with like the quote, "Take a chance" from our episode was like
Nice.
his like kind of thing. But he was really lucky in the sense that he was able to pass in his own home with his family around him. And like
Yeah.
most people during COVID didn't have that luxury.
Mm-mm.
So like, yeah, in hindsight, it definitely is a kind of a blessing in disguise to like
Yeah.
not have to go through an extra like traumatic experience more than you already have had to with that.
Yes.
But it's always nice to hear that at least growing up wise, you had both parents in the household and like they were there and like able to like care for you. And
Mhm.
I always find it interesting to hear how people grow up because obviously, especially nowadays, a lot of parents are separated and they're not
Oh,
together.
yeah.
So like there is that aspect where or grandparents are raising them or aunts and uncles, or sometimes the kids are having to raise their siblings. And like there's just I've talked to so many different people who have such different upbringings
Mhm.
that it really makes me appreciate the childhood that I had, where both my parents were together. We lived a pretty damn good life and still do. And I'm very appreciative for the way they did raise me, especially so me, not like people on this podcast, but people in general in life. Like
Yeah.
some people are raised pretty damn awful, like just some
Yeah.
rude.
Just hard.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
just like there's a lot of people out there who probably didn't have good parents or good role models in their life. And
Yeah.
like so it's always nice to like hear that and hear how someone was raised. And especially I'm wondering, I'm kind of curious too, like living up north, like being kind of so far away from the city, were you more of like an outdoorsy person? Did you guys spend a lot of time? I know
Oh,
you
yeah.
mentioned the camping and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we were always outdoors. Like I was saying, because Claudia came home with me not that long ago, and I was saying like how crazy it is to me now that my mom would just basically like open up the back door and she'd be like, "All right, I'll call you guys for lunch, like go," and it's just like, my backyard was, the woods. And so we just spent our entire childhood like running around the woods and building forts and, playing out there. And then someone's mom would yell like peanut butter and jelly, and we'd all come running and you'd, have a sandwich and then you just go right back outside. It wasn't rare that like we'd get off the school bus and there would be like a moose like over on the hill or something like
That's
that.
so cool.
Yeah, it was very cool. Like I didn't appreciate it enough then, which I think is probably pretty common in your childhood. You're
Mhm.
like, oh, like whatever. But then you become an adult and you're just like, when will I ever walk off a bus again and see, just like these beautiful things? It's just like right in my backyard,
Yeah, I don't think enough people appreciate that,
Yeah.
especially people who live up north or even just in New England in general who experience like the four seasons too.
Yeah.
Like such a different environment up here versus like I've lived in, like I just telling you, in Texas and Georgia.
Yeah.
Completely different environment, different culture, the way people experience stuff. Like, and that's part of the reason I also want to like I'm looking into New Hampshire as like a possible destination for myself. Is just I did this past fall, we were driving up to do a hike, and like me and my buddies were always like, we never see a moose. We always want to see a moose. And like finally this
Finally
time we
you saw
literally
it.
like I was taking a right onto I forget what road it was.
Yeah.
But all I see is this like giant moose, and it wasn't even like it was like a more of like a baby basically. It wasn't even like a big one, but like it was like
you don't
big.
want to see a big one because they're
Yeah,
dangerous.
yeah,
Like
that's
you
what
gotta
everyone
like
says.
back up slowly because they'll just charge your car. Too.
Yeah.
Like
So it was like a younger one, you could tell, but I was just like I saw it run through, and like the size, and it was just like the instant mood of everyone just went through that. We were just so excited, and it's just
Yeah.
like I want that experience. Like just like we live in obviously a world where technology kind of runs everything, and like
Yeah.
we get so immersed into this content world, and we'll dive into that probably a little bit later in the podcast. But being able to remove yourself and be in nature and like kind of just be away from everything is like the biggest like blessing
Mhm.
that we have. And like being in nature is like so natural that we forget about it sometimes. Like it's really like, and you need it for your own mental health and your physical health as well,
Yeah.
like vitamin D and stuff like that. It's
fresh
so
air.
important.
There's
So it's like that aspect of it is like so interesting. And like I'm almost in a certain way kind of jealous of like how you grew up. Is like I wish I like kind of like had that experience to be able to just like play in the woods and stuff like that. I mean, I got like woods over here, but it's nothing like
yeah.
up north. Like it's
Yeah.
totally different experience.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Like so as you kind of got older and stuff, did you have like in school or outside, did you play sports? Did you have any hobbies? Did you do clubs? Like what was kind of like your way of like kind of like interacting with other kids and making friends?
So, yeah, I mean, when I was younger, it was just like all the kids who lived in like our neighborhood that we just always played with. But then when I was, I think when I was about 7 years old, my mom put me in dance classes. And so I did like ballet, tap, jazz, hip hop. When I was old enough, I went on point. And which I would say like dance really kind of like saved me because I was like so behind in school for such a long time. And so dance definitely was something that like for being like such a wallflower my entire life gave me a lot of confidence. And then just always doing like outdoors things. Like, I mean, even like with our school, I remember like going to college, you know, and hearing how like kids went to, you know, like art museums on field trips and science museums and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, we would go ice fishing and people would be like, what's that? You know, and you're like,
Yeah.
well, they're like, you're joking, right? I'm like, no, you go and you like sit on the ice and you learn how to, you know, make a hole in it. And then you lay a line and you just wait for it to snap. And, you know, people like they're in disbelief of it. And I mean, lots of people from New England have gone ice fishing, but, you know, people from, you know, California would be like, what are you talking about? You know? But yeah, I would say dance was probably the biggest thing. And then when I was in junior high, I played field hockey for a while too.
So outdoor stuff was definitely more of like kind of like I mean it makes sense being up there. It's like that's like kind of what I was expecting.
Yeah.
I'm also gonna mess with this camera for a second as
sure.
we're talking. Sorry for the actual listeners. This is like the second time with this camera. Some dead air for you guys. I know you guys love that. I don't know why it does that. It randomly just like decides to like shut off. Like it's not like dead or anything, but it must be the app. But in terms of like the sports playing like field hockey and stuff, it was like junior high, like later on in life.
Yeah, that was just something that like my basically 4 best friends who are like still my best friends in life. They were like, oh yeah, we want to go and like try out for the field hockey team. And I was like, sure, I will, you know, I will too. And so that we could just kind of like all play sport together because we were all so close. But really it was just like, you know, taking ballet from like age 7 to age 18, I would say was like my biggest like confidence booster.
What would you say were some of like the values maybe that you've gained from dance? Or I was going to say dance because obviously that's what you're saying is more of like the impactful.
Yeah. Just having like really any self-confidence at all. I mean, you take a kid who's been like behind in school who you know, teachers would say, you know, like, you know, oh, you can't do that, or, you know, maybe you should stay back. And my mom was just kind of like thinking ahead, and she was like, I need to give this girl something that's going to make her feel good about herself because all of these other things aren't. And so she put me in dance classes, and, you know, I was good at it. It was something that I really enjoyed. And then you take this girl who, you know, can't excel in school, but then can get on a stage in front of, you know, 300 people and just go for it, you know? And so it teaches you that you have some sort of self-worth.
And that's super important, especially like growing up and just like, especially as like a child, like that's something that like I noticed too, especially as I got older, I struggled with was being confident. And like, as you become more aware, it's just like, especially growing through the teenage years and stuff too, as you get older, is like, you start comparing, you start looking around, and things start getting a little bit more kind of difficult. So being able to kind of develop that like early on too, and as grow with it, I think is super important. And like having that outlet where you can be creative and you can be expressive, and like that is so huge. And I think not enough kids have an outlet where they can be expressive.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was something that I struggled with for a long time too. Like sports are one thing, but like I don't think I ever really had a creative outlet for myself. And that was something that I really struggled with, was like, especially as I got older when football ended, was like, I don't really have an outlet for myself to be creative.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until this podcast where I kind of like was able to like kind of step into that light and kind of tap into that inner child, as people say, and like
Yeah.
get back to that version of who I was before. And I always like to like jokingly talk about when I was younger, my dad was always around with the camcorder and stuff. And I was always the one who was like, record me,
Yeah.
like the camera's on
Over
me. And
here.
like, I loved it. And I loved being like the star of the show. And like,
Yeah.
I loved it. And as I got older, just life kind of started beating me down. And I stopped like, I don't want my picture taken. Like, I don't want to do that. And like, also bad acne when I was like growing up as a teenager. I
Yeah.
had that, and just like confidence issues, insecurities. And I just was like, I don't want to just stop. And like, I just wanted to be away from everything. And as you grow up, and then like I was telling you off the podcast when I was in Georgia, those moments of like, what am I offering to the world? Obviously, you bring value to your family and your
Mhm.
friends, and you're doing a job, but like, what am I doing really? And like having that deep, like essential, like question for yourself was like, and the answer was like nothing. I
Yeah.
couldn't think of anything. And I'm like, this is not good. And that's what kind of birthed this podcast. And relating back to even just like, because we kind of went off the sports and stuff like that, the sports early on was like where I learned a lot of my life lessons, and that built up. But then obviously removing that is where I had to develop these things. I want to transition with this topic and talk a little bit kind of about post high school for yourself, and like
Mhm.
how you transitioned. Like you're getting to your senior year, you're looking to like life after high school. Like what's the path that you were looking to take, and kind of why?
So, I kind of like really felt like I knew exactly what I wanted to do when I was in high school. Um, when I was so like both my tattoos on my arms, this one's for my dad and then this one's for my mom. And on this arm, I have like an Egyptian scarab, because so my mom was an art history major when she went to college, and she was like, Laurel, just do me a favor, when you go to college, don't major in art history. And I was like, okay, that's fine. And so she had a book on Egypt and Tutankhamun and like all the different like archaeological digs there. And I remember looking at it when I was probably like 10 years old, and I was like, this is what I want to do with my life, you know? And then I watched Indiana Jones, and I was like, this is really what I want to do with my life. Like this is who I want to be. And so I went to, when like my junior, senior year, I was looking at colleges all with like archaeology and like ancient history programs, and found one that I fell in love with in Massachusetts. I went to a Wheaton College in Norton. And majored in classics, so like ancient Greek, Latin, and Coptic. And then also added art history to it. I'm sorry, Mom. And because I just loved it, because I was just like so in love with the topic, and in between my junior and senior year, I worked at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, because they had, I worked in their Egyptology department. They had over like 10,000 items from the 1920s that Harvard field archaeologists had like gone to Egypt and boxed up and brought back and gave to the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, and they had not been opened since the 1920s.
Oh, shit.
And so I was like in the basement, like opening these field boxes, taking pieces out that, from ancient tombs that had not, which, is now very frowned upon, but you're taking these pieces out and being like, no one's touched this since 1920. And before then, no one had touched it since ancient Egypt. And it was just like, like living your dream. and just being able to, we always saved all the noses that we found from like statues. And we'd go around because like if a statue falls, the first thing that breaks off of it is the nose.
That
So the
makes
next
sense,
time you
yeah.
go to a museum, you'll see like all the statues are probably noseless. And so we'd go after hours and just see if we could match up any of the noses to the statues.
That's so interesting. Like when you were like looking to get into this field, did you have any like doubts or fears about like because obviously like I could see probably from your mom's perspective of like taking care of yourself financially, like
Right.
where did like does this field pay? And like obviously the further you go with the education, the further you can go with the career too.
Yes.
So like that was
Yeah.
probably part of it as well, I'm assuming.
Yeah. After I graduated from college, I moved to Providence and lived here for a year and saved money as I was trying to kind of like take that gap year of being like, okay, what do I do? Do I go to grad school for this? You know, is this really what I want to do? You know, and you're just kind of trying to figure that out. And then I ended up moving to England for about 8 months.
Really?
And so I lived there for 8 months and got a Euro-rail pass and just kind of like, I did some archaeological digs in Bath while I was there, checked out like a couple universities, but other than that, I had never been out of New England other than Disney World, which doesn't count. I'd literally been, you know, to like Maine, Massachusetts, you know, New Hampshire, and, you know, upstate New York, and really had never expanded my world at all. And I was like, well, if I want to do it, I've got to do it now. And so moved there for like worked 4 jobs in Rhode Island, like saved all my money, and then moved there for 8 months and just kind of like went into as many countries as I could on the train.
What was that experience like? What were some of like the differences too that you might have noticed?
It was very interesting because like everybody kept asking me where I was from because nobody believed that I was American because I was nice and I wasn't overweight.
It's a fair stereotype, to be honest. That's a fair stereotype.
And then when I said that, you know, I was like, oh, well, I'm from, you know, like I'm from Maine or something like that. Nobody knew where that was. And so then I was like, well, I'm from Boston, and everybody knew where Boston was. But yeah, I mean, like for the most part, just like very like kind people. It is very clean. Like wherever you go, the trains run perfectly on time. Nothing's ever late. It's just Europe is a well-oiled machine, at least at that time. This was a long time, I mean, years ago now, but yeah, and it was just beautiful. And it was kind of beautiful to be able to like, you know, you take the train through these places that you like studied in your art history classes, and you see like, oh, like that would have been like a field that Van Gogh painted, you know, or that little town that you can see like far into the distance, you know, was one of those paintings you studied in your class, which was the very cool thing about taking the train instead of like flying places.
Yeah, it's probably smarter too. You get to actually like really see everything.
Everything. Yeah. And
that's so interesting. Like,
yeah.
Being able to do that, I kind of envy you in a certain way, like to be able to like really like go and just like travel Europe. And I always like, I'm very big on this podcast about like telling people like they should travel and going to travel. Like it is so important to get out there and just like experience, because there's so much out there other than the United States. Like obviously we have a great country, explore the United States too, but like like one of the coolest things, like I went to Ireland this past October, and like it weirdly felt like home. Like it was just so like this weird like feeling, and like
it's kind of cozy and like, and just like you, where in Ireland were you?
We went all around, like Dublin, Cork, Kinsale.
Okay.
What else?
I feel like Dublin felt like a little bit like New York City.
Yeah, I wasn't a fan of Dublin. Dublin was my least favorite place.
And
it's just too city.
Yeah, it's very city. It's still very cool, you know.
Yeah, cool experience.
So I drove from Dublin to Cork. Like Cork is I love Cork.
My favorite was Kinsale, because like there was mountains over there, and like I did a hike out there and stuff. Like that was like It was like the Gap of Dunlow was like the mountain region that we were hiking in, and just like
Yeah.
it's just so different. Like
Yeah.
it's just like a completely different, and it really didn't rain too much.
No,
like it,
no,
like
there is definitely a rain stereotype of like, oh, you go to England or Ireland or something and it's going to rain every day. But
there was a lot of rain, but like it wasn't like it wasn't as bad as I thought it was gonna be.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it was just to like experience a different culture and like the way they like even just like walking into the different like stores and stuff and seeing like different things and like different food and like it's just such a cool experience. And like even just walking by people, listening to people talk, like just like bypassing, it's just so cool. And just like I don't know, you just like these people are just living their life doing normal stuff, and it's like we're just visiting in this country and like a day in their life, and it's just such a cool thing. And I was so lucky to be able to like, because when people go to Ireland, they go to Dublin usually, and like it kind of really just kind of stay there, and usually for financial reasons, because like it's like expensive to really travel. But we rented a huge van, and there was like a bunch of us. Like it was my dad, two of my brothers, my uncle, and then two of my cousins, and we just traveled all up and down. Like, and we had a whole itinerary where we just went to different places, went to like different pubs, like, and it was just like cool to like see the different sceneries, the different pubs, like even just calling it a pub, like we call them bars here. It's just like just the way that they approach life is just so different. It's more relaxed too. I didn't really feel like it was just so like Dublin was kind of like a fast paced kind of vibe because it's a city, but like just driving out, as soon as you drive out the city, just seeing everyone with giant land properties and everyone has sheep and like cows and like
and if you don't, your neighbor's sheep come into your yard and you don't care. You know, it's just like like that's just a day.
And they have nice houses too. Like like they had really nice architecture and like you think maybe they're like country folk or maybe like a little poor, but like no, it's like really nice for the most part. Like obviously there's poorer areas in like every country, but like just so beautiful to see this like vast country, and it's very green because it does rain. So like very green, tons of rainbows. Like it was just like such a unique experience.
And then castles, you're just driving, you're like, and there's a castle, and then you just keep driving, and there's like this beautiful like the ruins of a cathedral. And I think one of the biggest things that I noticed in being there, and like no matter where you were, it was like this, was the fact that like you go into a grocery store here and you go to buy soap or sponges. There's like 20 different options. And so, you know, just to like stand in the grocery store aisle, you're like reading packages and taking in all of this information, and you're trying to decide like, do I want this one? Do I want that one? Well, that one's on sale, even though it doesn't have this feature that this one has, and things aren't like that there. Like you go to buy soap or a sponge and you have two choices. You pick which one you want. And just the amount that your brain is processing every day that you don't realize, like how much your brain is actually trying to like take in all of these facts and figures just about a sponge, and why at the end of the day you're like, I'm exhausted, you know. And that was part of it. You like, I never had that feeling there because you just go there and maybe there's just one option. That's the option you buy. You check out and you go home. You don't have to make so many choices just on like the 5 items that you need that day.
Yeah, we have abundance of choices in America, and like it's the paradox of choice. We have so many choices, you don't know what to choose. And like that's in every aspect of life. Like it's like there's just, and especially social media has like doubled and tripled down on that paradox where it's like you look around, there's so many different things that you could be doing, and then you get the fear of like missing out because like there's just so much stuff going on, and like that's such a weird, like interesting, like variable that's like different about the United States. But like also like I wouldn't trade living in the United States like compared to a lot of those countries. Like like after a little bit, like the one thing that like I didn't like about I visited Spain, I visited Ireland. I'm gonna visit Germany next September. I'm super excited about that. But one thing I don't like is just, and it's also because of just like how old the countries are, it's like how on top of everything is. Like I do like a little bit of, obviously like in Ireland, the further you got outside of the cities, it's more distance, but like the on top of everything, like it made me realize like why those countries were so affected by COVID. Like
for sure.
Everything is on top of each other. There was no way they were going to avoid that. It's either you let your complete economy crash, which some countries did do, or you let people try to live their life somewhat normally, and COVID's just going to exist.
Yeah.
So I definitely saw, I got COVID out there when I was in Ireland. So
Oh,
like,
did you?
yeah, so like there was no avoiding it. Like,
Yeah.
but that part is the only part that I was like not a fan of. It's just like how on top of everything
Yeah.
it was. But for the most part, like it was like, I would say everyone needs to go travel, especially
Yeah.
outside of the United States. It puts puts you in a different perspective.
Yeah.
Most people don't have that perspective, and like all they know is like where they live for the most part, or they go to Florida or some shit like
Yes.
that. Like we joked about earlier, it's just like knowing New England and Florida, like that's like the classic New England thing.
Yes. Yeah.
So I always say like travel outside this country, especially when like you're younger, you don't have kids and stuff like that. Like when you're able to do it, when you're healthy, like do it while you can.
Yeah.
Because like you also don't know how long life is. Like life can just snap of a finger, just be over. So I always say like travel while you can, while you have the funds, while you're healthy. Like do those things because you never regret traveling.
Yeah.
I've never had a like travel experience that I could think of that I was like, yeah, I definitely wish I didn't do that.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure.
So it's always interesting. But
yeah. And
go ahead.
Oh, so I was just going to say, so I did that and I was like, I don't want to go to grad school for archaeology. I was like, I'm not going to be able to spend my life in a library, which is what I was going to be doing. I was like, I need to do a job that I'm going to be able to help people. And so that realization, like I came home like right before Christmas and went and had Christmas with my parents. And, you kind of think like, did I just waste 4 years of my life, like in college, like studying like this very specific thing, thinking like, this is what I was going to do with my life. And now here I am like back at square one being like, all right, what do I do? Where do I go from here?
That's such a like scary feeling. And I had that similar feeling just like quitting my job and moving back home, obviously on a different degree. Like, but like that kind of like, what the fuck do I do now?
Yeah.
Like, and it's almost like important to have that moment in your life where it's like, what the fuck am I doing? Like, I don't know who I kind of am. I don't know where I'm going.
Yeah.
But like, there was this weird feeling that I just knew that I was going to be okay. Like I knew that I was going to figure this out. So like, what kind of led you down the path that you're on now? Like what was like the motivating factor to kind of like get into, personal training and get into fitness, and like, what was like the motivation there?
So when I came back, like I worked at YMCA's. And I worked in like their dance department. So I kind of like went back to old skills that I had. I was like, okay, like I know how to teach a dance class. I know how to work with kids. That's something I'm good at. So like, let's lean into that for a while. And so I ran a couple different dance programs in just kind of like various areas. And then worked for Festival Ballet Providence, which is Rhode Island's professional ballet company. And so I worked for them for about a year until, like all nonprofits, they tend to run out of money, and a bunch of us got laid off. And so then I found myself at the YMCA on the east side of Providence, and I was their membership director. And at that point, I was going through a bunch of things in my life, and I was super unhealthy. And so I was like, all right, I need to find what fitness means for me now, because like I'm never going to have that dancer body again. I'm never going to be, like when you're in high school and you're like, oh my God, I'm 105 pounds, like I've got to lose those 5 pounds so that I can, be that perfect ballerina. And then, now you've like lived a life and you are nowhere near that anymore. And you're like, okay, like, do I want to, like, I don't want to be skinny. I want to be strong, but I have to still come to terms with that. That's like a hard thing, especially as a woman these days, to be like, like, okay, I don't need to be a size 0, 2, or 4 or 6, like, but I also want to be able to like lift anything a dude can. And so once I started down that journey for myself and found that being a personal trainer was way more than just telling someone how to do push-ups, and you really kind of become a therapist. It's one of my clients, one of my very first clients, brought me a article from the Boston Globe that was entitled "My Personal Trainer's My Best Friend," because no one else in your life do you spend like between 1, 2, or 3 uninterrupted hours where like this is far away, like you don't look at your phone during a personal training session. We just talk to each other, while you're working out. You get to know like pretty intimate details of people's lives. Like the clients I've been doing this for 10 years, and I have clients that I've had for 9 of those years, and they're still with me. So we've gone through 9 years together. They helped me as like, my dad got diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and I was texting them being like, my mom just got home and she doesn't know where my dad is. I'm driving home right now. I'm not going to be able to make your appointment. And, and they were there for me through my dad passing away. And then I've been there for them through their mothers or sons or wives passing away. And you learned that, I think that obviously we talked before about having boundaries. You have to have boundaries, but it's such a special relationship if you let it be, and you're not just making people physically stronger, but you're making them, mentally and emotionally stronger as well.
Yeah, it's such a great mindset to have as a personal trainer. Is like it's not just about the fitness; it's also like their emotional and mental well-being too,
Yeah.
because they're all tied together.
Yes.
And I'm a big advocate about fitness and taking care of your body and like just moving it. Even if like you don't want to lift weights, you want to do any of that, just go for a walk, do something.
Yeah.
Like I'm like, especially now more than ever, like especially since the pandemic, like people need to be moving their bodies. Like you need to be taking care of your bodies, drinking water and like taking vitamins or supplements, whatever you prefer, and trying to eat as healthy as possible.
Yes.
Like I'm a big fan of Taco Bell. I'm not going to like sit here and say I'm not, but like it's also like being honest and be like, you have to have like again, boundaries and balance.
Yeah.
Like is putting that place down. It's like, all right, it's 9, 10 o'clock at night. I would love some Taco Bell right now, but you shouldn't have that right now. If anything, grab a piece of fruit. It's always a great munchy snack, or like, I don't know, anything like something more healthier than doing those options. But like save yourself those cheat meals if you want those. But like, if you, and especially with fitness, you got to put goals. You got to put goals and like tangible goals for yourself to hit. Cause like, if you don't, you're going to get unmotivated in the gym and just like kind of float. And like, I've definitely gone in that path. So
yeah. Well, and like I tell people like right off the bat, like, listen, like I'm never going to tell you to go on a diet. I hate that word. Like
it is a kind of toxic word.
Yeah, it's a horrible word. Like I'm never going to tell you like you can't eat carbs, you can't have sugar, like I'm not a big fan of alcohol, but it's one of those things where it's just like everything in moderation. Like send me like what your food is and let me make suggestions on how to clean it up. And then live with that for 2 months. And then let's revisit it. And then let's clean it up a little bit more. And so you're doing it in steps that work for you, as opposed to just being like, okay, well, we've got to cut all of this stuff. And the whole like, sugar-free, fat-free, like please stay away from all of that stuff, because that didn't exist in the like, I think that whole like sugar-free, fat-free like wave really came in like the like late 50s, early 60s. And there's a reason why, like, you go to a vintage clothing store and like the clothes look so small, is because like really those industries that have created all of like the prepackaged food didn't exist back then, and so people just naturally ate like real food. And then that sort of wave came in history, and that's when like sizes started to change and diets started to change. And but yeah, like that's my biggest thing, is that I'm just like, I will not, and I don't want you to do like meal replacement anything. Like all of that stuff is just so bad for you, like let's learn how to actually eat so you can still have Taco Bell.
Yeah, it's like eating like actual like normal healthy food. Like so much processed shit. Like, and like I'm not saying like cut it all out, because I obviously understand life and how busy life can be, and like it is easier to have packaged food or like getting fast food. Like I understand that aspect. So like I'm not one of those people that's like need to eat all natural food. It's like
We love
like,
Doritos.
yeah, like we gotta be like life is about moderation and balance.
Mhm.
Like, and you gotta figure out what that is for you. And once you figure out what that is for you, you're gonna live a lot healthier and happier life because you can figure out, yeah, I probably shouldn't go out drinking with my friends every weekend. It's probably not the best thing for me. Or I shouldn't have fast food 3-4 nights a week. That's not a good thing.
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
or I shouldn't eat late night chocolate every single day of the week just as like my comfort food. Like that's
Yeah.
not a healthy thing. Like putting down these like boundaries for yourself and not jumping over them are so crucial in
Mhm.
maintaining a healthy, like positive life. And I want to jump into this before we get too late in the podcast is like the story about limiting beliefs.
Yes.
And we talked about that a little bit off podcast and I had to cut you off because like it was about to get really good. So I wanted to allow you to kind of talk about limiting beliefs as since
Sure.
we're kind of talking about taking care of your body and your mind and stuff like that. Like more talking about your mind in this aspect. I'll let you
Yeah.
kind of take the floor with this.
Yeah. So, one of the things when I was like kind of thinking about what I wanted to talk about on the podcast was, like as a lot of us were, like 2019, 2020, 2021 was just in like this real rough patch of my life and was trying to figure out like, where am I going to go? What am I going to do? Was in therapy, which therapy is wonderful. Everybody should go to therapy because it helps. It helps to have someone to talk to and to like bounce ideas off of. And so I had been in therapy for a couple of years and got to the point where I was just kind of sick of my own voice, like complaining about the same thing over and over and over again. And I was like, all right, I need to cut this and I need to try something new. I need to stop just like being stagnant and talking, and I need to jump to actually like feeling like I'm doing something about like where I am in my life. And so I don't even remember how, but I found this woman on Instagram. Her name's Sabrina Palazzo, and she is a spiritual healing course. So she does like a lot of like breath work, which is really great to be able to kind of like process trauma and grief, which I had a lot of, like having just lost my dad. And she had this class called Transcend, and I saw it and it just like kept popping up over and over again. And I was like, you know what? I think like this is popping up because I'm just really meant to do this. And so I signed up for her course, and it was me and 4 other women. And every week, it was a 10-week course. Every week we touched on a different subject of like trying to like you said, like heal that inner child, heal the thing, heal the wound, and like really identify it so that you recognize it, but you're then not acting on it. It's not the thing that you're taking with you every day. You're taking the knowledge of that wound without taking the action of the wound. And so one day one of our course subjects was limiting beliefs. And she said, like, I want you guys to think back on the first time in your life that someone said, you're not capable of that. And, not being like your mom saying, like, oh, don't touch a hot stove, or, someone not letting you cross the road because a car is coming, but like someone saying, you can't do that. And going into the course, I was like, I really have no idea what this limiting belief is. Like, and then right at the right time, it kind of clicked. And I was like, man, like it was my first grade teacher. I was 6 years old, and, you're going to school really kind of like for the first time. And I would go to school and I would just cry every day because I missed my mom and it was hard and I was scared. And we had a bathroom in the classroom, and she would say, not even asking me what was wrong. She'd just say, go to the bathroom until you can compose yourself. So there right away, you just have, a 6-year-old who has very loving parents, but this very first authority figure in your life that is outside of your family is saying, you're not worth the time of me trying to figure out what's wrong. So go figure it out yourself in that dark bathroom. And when you can, come back and not cry, like that's when you're worth any of my time, then I'll try to teach you something. And so at the same time, I had a lot of food allergies. And so I had a lot of hearing loss because of them. And so she also couldn't teach me how to read. And so you're 6th and 7, supposed to be going to 2nd grade. And she calls my mom and she's like, your daughter has to stay back because I can't teach her how to read. She was like, I give up. There's no way that I'm going to be able to teach her. So, she'll just have a different teacher next year and maybe they can do it. And my mom was basically like my champion at that point. And she was just like, fuck you. No, she's going to 2nd grade. She's like, I'll teach her how to read over the summer. But there's no way I'm letting her stay back because that is going to that's going to end her. Then she's going to see all of her friends go. And that scared little girl that's there is going to diminish even more. And so, they pushed me to 2nd grade. We found out I had food allergies. We found out I had hearing loss. I had an operation and a bunch of stuff came into play there. And my mom was able to teach me how to read. But then you take that limiting belief of that first person not believing in you and not taking the time to help you, to reassure you. And I took that with me my whole life. And when I found that out, when I was like, okay, this is my limiting belief, this is my aha moment of I don't have to, she was wrong. I was worth someone saying, I know you miss your mom, but I'm here with you right now. So, I can't stay here and hold your hand, but anytime you miss your mom, let me be there to reassure you that, you're going to see her soon. And, let's keep going through this day together. And, I know you're having a hard time reading, but we'll figure this out. Maybe we should talk to your mom. Maybe we should talk to, and schools are different now where I think that there's a little bit more connection there. Where back then it was just kind of oh, throw that kid in special ed. But,
there's more empathy and sympathy, probably.
Yes, yeah.
Or at least now, obviously, we're saying. Yeah.
But depending upon where you are, this could also be a product of where I grew up. Again, just kind of being a school in the middle of nowhere, where these are the teachers you have in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, these are the resources that we have, and this is all we got. So it's that makes a lot of sense.
And but I realized that, in that course that I took with Sabrina, okay, this is why I hold myself back, is because I don't believe in myself because of that one thing that teacher said. And so I even use that with my personal training clients now, where, they're going through a hard time in their relationship and they've repeated the same relationship mistakes over and over, which is what
I do that too.
Who doesn't, which is one of the things that I had done. It's well, why am I constantly putting myself on that back burner? Why don't I think that I'm worth it? Why don't I think I'm worth someone trying? Well, because when I was 6, someone said, you're not worth trying for. And your brain accepts that. And that's what you pull forward. And until you isolate that and understand it, you repeat it. And so that was kind of that is the rest of the conversation that we can have. But, it was a huge moment for me.
And it's so true and that's why part of the reason I even open up with the family dynamic and stuff like that is because people really don't understand that childhood stuff really impacts what's going on later in life. And we carry that through our entire lives.
Yeah.
And like you said, you have that one experience, and then we have more experiences that just reaffirm that throughout life. So it's you could have that experience when you're 6, and then I don't know, you get later in life and you're in dance, and your teacher says, "Oh, you can't do that. We're gonna have so and so do that instead." Yeah. And it's it might be a small thing that you don't even think of, or we're going to let her do that, not you do that, or just whatever. And that's just more reaffirming onto that initial belief that was established when you were 6.
Yeah.
And people don't truly understand. And I've gone to like a Peruvian shaman before and like done some of this like healing and stuff, and like digging back into like these different aspects, especially what was more relationship for me, and like figuring out where these issues were and like what was like kind of like going on. And it all stemmed back to the scared child, like going back to a specific moment I'll never forget was like watching, like I was like after my first communion or something like that, and my grandmother was going to get the cake, and like I just got yelled at by my dad, so I ran by like crying past the garage. I look, I see her going to grab it, I run into the corner like near the fence, and then I heard a loud bang, and then my grandmother fell, busted her head, had to go to the hospital, and then after that she ended up finding out she had cancer, and like it just like was just like a bunch of stuff started happening after that. And I always wondered, I'm like, it's just like that moment really changed a lot of stuff for me.
Yeah.
And like I had to like kind of go back to that child and let that child know it's like, you're okay and I have you now, and like you can trust me going forward.
Yeah.
And it was like such a like weird moment because like she was really big into visualization. And it's so weird because like I could see it. Like I could see myself in a corner, like scared, like afraid, and like I had to like visualize myself now going to that child and protecting them. It's like, I have you now. We're okay. You're safe with me.
Yeah.
And like once you're able to connect those two, you can be more free, you can be more of yourself, you be more creative and more full of life and energy. And like that is the most important aspect, is like so many people lose touch with their inner child.
Yeah.
And like I saw a TikTok that was like talking about this kind of like earlier, of just like they showed like it was like a picture and like just like a person aging through life. It was like a drawing, but like through that drawing, all you see was this light going through the drawings. And how they explained it was like, see that light? It never changes. Just the person is like the outside, your human form is changing, but that energy never changes. That's you always. So you at 7 is the same person you as now, just with a little bit of life experience.
Yeah.
So you have to be able to reconnect to that person when you were at 7 and realize you are all the same person.
Right.
And then when you're able to do that, you can become more aware of your surroundings. That's where a lot of this healing truly does happen, is getting back in touch with that.
Yeah.
And it is so true. So many people in life have this limiting belief that they are not good enough for something, that they cannot achieve something. And I'm like super glad that you brought it up and that you actually did the work yourself too, because so many people are afraid to do it.
It's hard. It's hard to go back, and it's hard to like think, I thought for a week trying to think about like, oh, is it something my mom said to me or something my dad said to me, and it's hard to think about that, really that first integral time that you were told, no, you're not capable of something. And I mean, I'm sure for some people it's a lot easier depending upon their family dynamic. But for me, like it really took me like some time to be able to be like, oh yeah, like she was awful. That wasn't me. I took ownership of that. I took ownership of failing first grade. I took ownership of, being, weak and crying in a classroom and, missing my mom. And when really that wasn't on me, and then going forward in your life, you start to take ownership like, oh, well, that must be my fault. And that must be my fault. And that must be my fault. When sure, there are things that you do wrong. We all have things that we do wrong, but then you're in an unhealthy relationship and you're saying like, oh, well, this isn't working because of me. And it's like, no, this isn't working because of two different things in here. Sure, I'm doing something, but so is someone else, and I need to now be strong enough to say, oh, no, this is on you. It's not, everything isn't just my fault.
That's a huge thing, is most people they'll take too much accountability and struggle in a lot of relationships and I've done that, where it's like,
when you're a giver,
it's like, you just want to you don't want people to feel bad. And like, you want to just there's also like it's important to take ownership for stuff too. Like when stuff's really your fault,
Yes,
like,
of
cause like
course.
there are also a lot of people who don't take ownership for anything.
Learn how to apologize.
Learn how to apologize, be accountable for yourself, be accountable for your actions. Like understand that like at the end of the day, you are your own person in control of just yourself. So whatever you do, it's on you to figure it out. So, and I always say, I was like, at the end of the day, like no one's coming to save you. It's just you. So
Just
like
you.
you have to figure it out one way or the other. And I think it's important that people understand these messages. And like, that's why I always love these conversations, because it's so important to have these conversations, and not enough people sit down with people and have that actual conversation.
Yeah.
We are getting to the back end of the podcast, but I do want to give you a chance to talk about your photography business as well. It's like, so we didn't get to talk about that.
Oh, yeah.
And like, we're getting late in the podcast, but I do want to
Yeah,
give you that
that's okay.
opportunity to talk about that.
Well, and we could save that for next time too, if you ever want to have.
Well,
it
I want
back.
to let's
But-
just talk about you. I'll definitely come back, but I definitely want you to talk about it.
The photography really came from when I lived in Europe. And that was one of the things that I did, is that, like, obviously you're in these beautiful places. And so you're just taking all of these pictures, and it was really kind of like, you know, looking for, like, I had that dancer part of me that was really creative. Obviously I wasn't being creative with that at that time. And so then I kind of jumped to photography. And, you know, when I came home and was showing my mom, like, all of the pictures, she was like, "Wow, you're good at this. Like, you know, this is something you should pursue." And I was like, "That's such a mom thing to say, Mom." Like, you know, every mom thinks that their kid would be, you know, good at everything. But then when I came back to Rhode Island, I was like, you know, maybe this is something that I'll try to see. And so I just kind of wrote to a bunch of different photographers and was like, "Hey, I'll work for you for free. Like, I just want to like learn how to do this." And so there was one guy in Pawtucket that he was like, "Yeah, sure. Like, let's do it." And he was an architectural photographer. And so we went around to like all of these like huge, you know, like new builds in like Newport, like these multi-million-dollar homes. And we were hired by like the interior designer and the architecture firm and the landscape architect to just go and like take pictures for brochures or magazines and that kind of stuff. And so that's how I kind of got into that. And then, you know, it just kind of like constantly evolves from there. I usually do architecture photography, tends to be like my personal love, like the stuff that I do for myself. But then I just love. And so like, I love to like shoot weddings and like engagement sessions and that kind of stuff. And it's kind of fun. Like right now I'm training a couple that I took their engagement photos first. And then they were like, "Oh, wait, you're also a personal trainer, right? We want to get in shape for our wedding." And so I'm their personal trainer and I'm going to photograph their wedding. So
you hear that, people?
Like,
See, it's 2 for 1 right there.
And one-stop shopping.
Yeah.
But it's kind of fun, you know? And so then you really get to know the couple too, you know? And so like, by the time we get to their wedding, we'll like all be best friends.
And I wanted to at least hit that at least a little
Sure.
bit, and like we could get that into maybe a future podcast. But
Yeah.
at least wanted to give you a chance to kind of like plug that too and talk a little bit about that.
Yes.
So we are getting towards the end of the podcast, and I do like to wrap up with one question.
Yeah.
So, what would your advice be to someone who wants to pursue their passion?
Become friends with your fear, because you're going to be afraid. And there are going to be a lot of things that happen and pop up that you are going to be afraid of. And your fear is really your best friend, because that fear means you're onto something. Because if you weren't afraid, it wouldn't be worth it. That jump wouldn't be worth it. That next step wouldn't be worth it. And so when you get to that point where you're scared, like, love that feeling, accept it, and don't try to push it away, because that's probably the biggest gift you're going to get, is to be afraid of something. And, you know, and no matter what, it's going to work out.
Perfect. It's a perfect way to wrap up. And I actually really like that too.
Yeah.
Fear is like
Fear's your best friend.
Usually it's like your fears, because it's trying to protect you too at the same time. So it's it is like a good feeling, but you also got to be willing to push through it. And I think it's a perfect message to wrap up this podcast.
Yes.
Laura, I appreciate you coming on this podcast
thank you for having me.
Sharing. We cruised through this thing. Usually I try to and especially we have a time limit I was trying to keep track of too. And we just powered through it. It's been so easy talking to you, and I appreciate you coming on this podcast. It's been amazing.
Much.
For you guys, if you guys like the podcast, please rate, review, subscribe, share it with your friends, share it with your family, share it with your grandma. You can check it out at thecarrollconnection.simplecast.com. Also, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all the major listening platforms. If you like to watch your podcast, you can go on YouTube, search The Carroll Connection or Jared M. Carroll. Should pop up right for you. And if you want to be a guest or return as a guest, you can find me on Instagram at Jared M. Carroll or at The Carroll Connection. Like I said earlier, if you have my number, you can text me or Snapchat, however you want to reach me. We can set that up. But till next time, guys, peace.